So today is the share calling for Parshas Toldos Kislev, Rabbi Gaffney.
You had some problem in English? Yeah. All right, so we're going to turn to this week's Parsha, Kofor, chapter Kofor. And it's Parsha we're going to deal with the Pesukim Tesvor, Tesayan, and for the Emerson, we can even begin from Pasuk Yud Gimel, from Shlishi. And we find that Yitzchak Avinu went to live in Eretz Plishtim. He went to live in the land of the Philistines. But it was the capital city of that was Gror, a place called Gror. And the king there was called Avimelech. Now we find the same thing by Avram Avinu, that he also went to Eretz Plishtim, and the king was also called Avimelech. So therefore some Mephoshim suggest that it wasn't the same person, Avimelech, but it was a custom in the Eretz Plishtim to call their kings Avimelech. Pinkasivi in Mitzrayim, it was a custom to call the kings Pare, even though they may have had their own private names. So therefore Avimelech doesn't necessarily mean it was the same Avimelech. And if we learn like that, then it's easier to understand certain inyanim, but it's not the place to go into it now, because we're short of time this evening. But suffice it to say that the king there, Avimelech, he also considered or attempted to take Rivka Imenu, similar to what happened with Avram Avinu when he was in Eretz Plishtim. And then, after that, we see miraculous Indian what happened with Yitzchak when he planted, and he was tremendously blessed by the Eibishter with the results of his crops in that particular year. And then the pasuk says, "Vayigdal hoish, vayelech choloich v'godel." That Yitzchak became great, and he was going continuously greater and greater the whole time. Ad ki godal ma'ed, that he became tremendously great. And vayhiloi miknei tzein or miknei boko, he had flocks of sheep and of cattle. V'avuda rabbo, and many workers of much achievement around him as a result of his riches. Vayikanu oisei Plishtim, and the Plishtim envied him. And then the pasuk says, "V'chol ha'be'eros asher chofru avdei oviv," that all the worlds literally that the servants of his father, meaning Avram Avinu, b'yemei Avraham Oviv, what they had dug all these wells, shitmum Plishtim, the Plishtim filled up these wells. How do you call it? They verstopped them. Are you chewing gum or something? Shitmum Plishtim vayimalum ofo, and they filled them with dust. Vayevam Avimelech el Yitzchak, the king of the Plishtim, said to Yitzchak, "Leik mi imono, you must go away from us, ki yotzamtu mimenu me'ed, that you become too great for us." That was the old saying, this town is not big enough for both of us anymore. Now you must go. You must depart from us. Vayelech misham Yitzchak, and he went away, vayichan b'nachal Gror, not in the city of Gror, but in the river or the stream of Gror. So we have to understand that this Nachal was distant from Gror. It wasn't already, and it would appear that it wasn't even in the kingdom of Avimelech. was outside the, what you might call, outside the pale. Vayoshav Yitzchak, vayachper es be'er es hamayim, asher chofru b'yamei Avram Aviv. And Yitzchak returned literally, and he dug all the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Avram his father. Vayisatmu Plishtim, and we just had before, the Plishtim had filled them up, or how they call it, blocked them. Vayisatmu Plishtim acharei Moshe Avraham, after the passing of Avraham. Vayikro lahem shemois, and Yitzchak called the Be'eres, or these wells which he dug, he called them names, Kashemois asher kora lahen aviv, and he called them the same names which his father Avram had called them. So we see then that for some reason Yitzchak saw it proper, or he saw it necessary to redig these wells. So the shadow occurs to the intelligent reader that if these wells were inside Gra, if they were there in the kingdom of Avimelech, then since Avimelech has sent him away and they're frightened of him, they don't want him around anymore, then why would all of a sudden Yitzchak, inside their kingdom, he would dig wells which they already filled them up? And he's about to leave now, and he would dig the wells. I mean, that seems a rather strange phenomenon that he'd do that. But what did he want with digging these wells? And he calls them the same names that they were called in the time of Avraham Avinu, whatever these names may have represented. It would also be rather strange. They would allow him to call them names, and it's inside their kingdom, and they're ousting him from their kingdom. So therefore, it would tend to the idea would tend to grasp that maybe these wells were other wells, not the ones that are mentioned in the other pasuk, or maybe they're the same ones. And if they are, then the question is about. So we'll soon see about that in a second. Vayachperu avdei Yitzchak b'Nachal. Now that he was out and he'd gone to Nachal Gra, he wasn't in Gra anymore, he'd gone to the river of Gra, then his servants dug in the river. Vayimtzu shom be'er mayim chayim, and they found a be'er, of living water. Vayorivu roya Gra im roya Yitzchak, and this time the roya Gra, they came out of Gra, it would appear, because Nachal Gra is already not Gra, and they had a whole machlekes with the servants of Yitzchak, and they said, Lanu hamoyim, the water belongs to us. Vayikro Shem haber Asik, and Yitzchak called it that particular well businessing, literally, could have been busy. Asik, they were busy with him. We're going to see Rashi touches that word hisasku in a particular way. And so therefore it would appear that he left that bear alone, or he didn't dig it any further. So they decided to dig another be'er, and so the Abdei Avimelech also caused trouble on that also. Vayikra Shmo Sitno, and they call it literally hatred, or how do you call it? Like Lashon Hara, or things of that nature. So that will appear that he called it also due to the quarrel, but he just gave it another, didn't he? If you want to grin, then you have to do it some other time, okay? Not during classes, and not when I happen to turn my eyes into the safe, then you exchange all these sort of strange grins with Ploini and Ploini, okay? I don't think that's a sign of even distance from adulthood, to do a thing like that. Vayatek Mishom, and he went away from there. Vayakper Be'er Acheret, he dug another be'er. This time they didn't quarrel about the bear, they let it stay. Vayikra Shmo Rechoives. This time he called it with a name, a very special name, Rechoives, but there's a city nowadays called Rechoives. Anyway, whatever that may be. Vayemer ki ato hirchiv Hashem lano. The Eibishter has broadened us, literally, going to give us breadth in the land. Uforino va'oretz, and we will be fruitful, literally, in the land. We're going to spread out into the land and be fruitful. And then he went away from there up to another place, and then the Behemshech, the whole thing, that Avimelech came out and wanted to make peace with him, and the Avdei Yitzchok, they also dug another Be'er, and they told him that they found water. So we see that Yitzchok was, and his servants and his shepherds were always digging Be'eres. They're always digging these wells of water. So let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says that they send him out into Nachal Gro, in Pasuk Yud Zayin. So Rashi says, Rochak Minoia. That's a long way away. Nachal Gro is not the city of Gro. That's a long way from it. But that's like we suggested. Maybe it's another kingdom, or it's another Gvul, outside the realm of Gro. Vayosho, Vayachper. Now it's interesting, Rashi misses out the word Yitzchok. Because Vayosho, Yitzchok, Vayachper, as Beres Hamayim. Rashi just quotes the Pasuk briefly, and he says, Vayosho, Vayachper. Eish Be'eres, Asher Chofru B'mei Avram Aviv, U'Plishtim Sotmu. And the Plishtim had filled them up, or covered them. Before Yitzchok left Gro, then he went back and he dug them up. He dug them up and opened them. So now there's a whole big difference of opinion amongst the great Meforshei Rashi. How do you read that sentence? So the way I just read it was, Plishtim Sotmum, we've been told that they already blocked the wells. Koidim Shanosa, before Yitzchok left, then he dug them. He went back and he dug them up. Well, some people say that it's all one sentence. And they say, Ashechofer ben Avram Aviv, pause, Plishtim Sotmum Koidim Shanosa Yitzchok Migrah. And then there's another sentence, Chozove v'Chofra. In other words, that the Plishtim covered them just before he left. That's when they covered him, and that's when he dug them. So then it would become very, very peculiar, because the Pasuk says that they covered up the wells even just after the passing of Avram Avinu. I mean, that would seem to be quite a long time ago. Not at the moment that Yitzchok is leaving. And so if he was leaving, and that's when they filled them, then how would he have a chance to open them again if they were filling him at the time that he's going? So therefore, it seems to be more comfortable to say, no, that the Plishtim had already filled them a long time before. But before Yitzchok left, then he dug them up. Now the previous Rashi before that tells us, why did the Plishtim go about filling up these wells which Avram Avinu had dug, or at least his servants had? So he says, V'sitmu Plishtim, Mipnei she'omru, because they said, Takola heim lanu, Mipnei hagaisutz, haboyes aleinu. They're a takola, meaning a stumbling block, an unfortunate thing in our way, because of the armies and all the different militias. Gaisos means, militias, armed armies or armed people who come upon us. And since there's these open wells with water, then that attracts all the armies to come down into this area and to camp in our area and make us trouble and make us problems. And therefore they filled up the wells in order to keep the Gaisus away. And therefore Rashi says, Tamunin Plishtoi, that the Targum says, Tamunin Plishtoi. And Rashi says, that Lashon brought down in the Targum is Lashon steamer. It's a meaning of filling up, blocking altogether. Ubelashon HaTalmud, Mitamteim Esalei. That the word Tamtunin or Tamnunin in the Gemara is Mitamteim Esalei. Have you ever heard of that before? You mean to tell me that you finished Bochum in Tom to me, you never heard of Timtum Alev? You never heard of that? You heard of Timtum Alev? Timtum Alev is a Inen and Avedus Hashem. So that's based on a Lashon in the Gemara, in Sekta Yuma, where the Gemara says that if you do an Avera, Chas v'Shalom, you do something which is neged, Ratzon Hashem, then the Avera is Mitam Teim Esalei. Now Rashi says over there in the Gemara and in another place here in the Chumash, Rashi says Mitam Teim means to block it off. That your heart becomes blocked and you don't hear what your mind really tells you. And that's what Timtum Alev is according to Chassidus, that even though you learn Chassidus and you think about Chassidus, don't you? You better watch, I'll have to ask you to leave. Either you put yourself together or you have to clear out. As a matter, Timtum Alev means that your heart is blocked in such a way that even though your mind is telling you everything, and you know what his Kedushin was a hateful misere, nonetheless, whatever your brain tells you, it doesn't get through. Metamteim Esar. Now the Gemara said if you do an Aveda, Rachmon in Itlan, well, that can be metamtem your lay. It blocks your heart. And you don't hear the more delicate messages that your mind would like to tell you. In other words, you learn Torah, but it doesn't get into the heart. Anyway, says Rashi, metamtem esalei. So what did Rashi want with all that? Well, further, you could say that what these Plishtim did, these Plishtim gave an excuse. And they said that we're worried about the Gaisus which are coming upon us. So if that's the case, then what they could have done was put rocks over the top of they'll cover them in some way, but kept the water. Yeah? The water would have been there and the Gaisus wouldn't have picked it. Or you could say that they covered them with offar in such a way that it would not even look like a pile of stones. It would be very well hidden and very well camouflaged, but really the bear was still. And that word tamnunin, which is brought down in the Targum, could be touched that way. It could be touched that way because we have a Lashon in the Gemara, hatmona. You've heard a lot. Shabbos, a hatmona means that you hide something under a warm material on Shabbos or on Erev Shabbos. It's called hatmona. So maybe that's what a techer means. Rashi, oh no, it doesn't. It means the techer filled them up. Yeah, they filled up the be'eras altogether with water. With offal. With offal. They filled them up altogether. So now, if he's there with Teishkuman, that Rashi tends to he tends to believe a little bit what they said to Plishtim, even though he says Omru, that's what they said. Now, normally, Rashi could have just said the reason they did it was Mipnei HaGaisus. Yeah, that's the reason why they did it. They're worried about the armies. Well, Rashi says Omru, they said, Tafala Hilano Mipnei HaGaisus. In other words, Rashi tends to sort of hint that maybe they were just saying this, but really there were other reasons why they filled it. And if Rashi goes out of his way to say that really they really filled them up completely. In other words, that they did it, a full job. If it was just to get rid of the Gaisus, or rather to keep Gaisus away, or not attract Gaisus into the area, then they could have covered it with dust, or not necessarily filled up the whole thing with dust. Rashi learns Sotmum, that they mamish blocked them completely, and that's the Lashon, Metamte Masalev, that the Gemara means that your heart doesn't hear anymore, you become Metum Tam. And like the famous, in the modern Hebrew, they say somebody's Metum Tam, it's a slang expression, not a nice thing. It means that his head is blocked. He doesn't hear what you say to him, Clark. And I mean, it would follow then that maybe Rashi sort of thinks that this is just what they did really say, but not what they really meant. And maybe there was some other reason, and they filled him up because maybe it was part of the kino. Yeah, it's written V'kanu b'y plishtim, and then immediately it's written a pasuk or two after that he went and dug the wells, Yitzchak. Well, that would tend to indicate that maybe that was all part of the kino that they had for him. They didn't want him having these wells of his father around. Oh, but then comes the amazing shaila, Elohim Cain, how come they let him open them up just before he left? So maybe we could answer that, and we could say, well, what do they care? If he wants to open up the wells and he's leaving, he's going over to Nachal Grow, he's not going to be anymore in Grow, then they'll have use of the water anyway. So he wanted to dig the wells, and no gesundere. What does it really bother us? Now he dug the wells, and now we'll have use of the.
They just closed them. They just closed them.
Huh?
They're closing them, now he's digging them up again. What's the point of that?
So then we'd ask him the Shiloh, why we just said, why would he talk to that? Why would he dig before he left? So therefore, maybe one could say, like we said earlier, that Rashi believes him. Rashi said it was tough because of the Geisos, and we'd have to say that when Yitzchak left, there wasn't any fear of these Geisos anymore. And therefore he dug them, and for some reason, they weren't particularly angry about him digging well, neither were they at Avraham Avinu either. And therefore Yitzchak was out to dig them again and get away with it. That's the way we have to learn the pshat. Comes along the Ramban, and the Ramban says, wait a minute, it should be written in Rashi that was a time when there was geishas, but before Yitzchak left, there was no more geishas anymore. But that's not written. It's just written that they were worried about geishas, and then it comes along Yitzchak and he digs them again. Rashi should have said something about these geishas. There's something's happening there. And Rashi doesn't say anything about it. Why would Yitzchak dig them? And why would they let him get away with it? The Ramban says no, that was one set of wells, and they ruled him by the Plishtim, and Yitzchak was despaired from those wells. When he went away, he went to Nachal, and then he dug this new lot of wells, and it's not a separate lot of wells. This is the first lot of wells he dug after he left Eretz Plishtim, and that's the three wells that we learn about here. One's Asig, one is Sitna, one is Rechoives, and then the ones that were inside Grow, he forgot about. In most Meforshei Rashi don't learn that way. But Rashi learns that he had two sets of wells. He had the ones that were inside Grow, and for some reason he managed to dig them just before he left, and nobody seemed to be concerned about that. And then there's another lot of ones that he gets over into Nachal Grow. Why would the Plishtim, why would they quarrel? Rashi says, Rashi says, Irur. That they made a complaint, or like a counterclaim. And so we could suggest, some of them before Rashi also say that if it was in the Nachal, and it was called Nachal Gro, then maybe it was a river that provided Gro with water. I mean, you notice a lot of towns all around the world, they're built originally on a river. These towns in England, they're built on rivers or streams, because that's how they used to have water. That was their water supply. That's how they used to use things for water mills and for all sorts of things. But they had to have a stream or a river. And maybe that river provided gra, even though he was already over in another part of the river, but that's what provided gra. And that was written that he dug in the Nachal, the first one. You heard what they said, listen here, you can't dig in the Nachal, because what you're doing is drawing water out of the river, not from the ground. And therefore they made a squabble. What Lafizeh comes is that really the Plishtim were not just trying to prevent Yitzchak digging wells. No, they had a little bit of a point. That water was really was kind of surprised there in Medina with water. And therefore they got a tiny case to dig right alongside the the knuckle, in the knuckle, right alongside the knuckle. So therefore Yitzchak moved away, and he dug another one further away, and here they came along with sitno, with hatred or complaint. But that's already a shvera. And therefore it's mashma, and unfortunately that's a more delicate quarrel, a more harder one to deal with. And Ein Nachanami that already had itself in hatred and what you might call objection. That was called sitno. Auch upon him, Yitzchak took the hint and he moved even further away, and he dug another bear, and that was already another story altogether. But that was already, that the Philistine let it completely alone, and it was called Rochaives. And he said, now the Abish has made us broad, and we're going to expand into the earth. The Rashi comes along, and he says, "Uforinu be'oretz." Rashi says, "Kitargumei v'neifush pa'aro." We're going to be many. So you might think that the word of forinu be'oretz means to do something with the well. We're going to have now this well, and that will give us a lot of vegetables or other orchards or trees or not that. And therefore comes along Rashi and says, no, v'neifush pa'aro, we are going to literally multiply. In other words, that there's going to be a multiplication of Yitzchak and his family and everything. There's going to be a lot of people in the land. When's that going to happen? It'll take time. And neifush is loshen osid. That appears to be loshen osid. And Rashi teaches that even though it's written in the past, uforinu ba'oret, it really means in the future. In the future, it's going to be a tremendous breadth and spreading out in land v'neifush ba'ara, and that's somehow connected with the digging of the third ba'er. So I thought the shadow was it do? What's the connection with the third ba'er? And all of a sudden Yitzchak is foretelling there's going to be v'neifush ba'ara in the land. There's going to be this tremendous build-up and spreading out of Yidden and the family and the descendants of it. So we see then that Yitzchak is very busy with the infant digging ba'eres. And according to Rashi, it would appear, at least certain Mephosheh Rashi, that he even dug ba'eres where the Plishtim had already caused trouble with them, and he got away with it. He dug them, and according to that shot, he just left them. He went out into Nahogah, and these had been over in the kingdom of God, and he dug them, and they just remained, as it were. They weren't filled in again necessarily by the Plishtim, and he dug these wells, and he went away and he dug other wells. And then even when he meets up with Abimelech the second time, and he makes with him an agreement with the whole master, and another thing, he dug a well. He dug another well, or his servants did, and they found a whole big digging well. So I thought the Shaila, what's the end of digging wells, particularly on the part of Yitzchak, even though Avram Avinu had already dug them, but Avram Avinu was still vulnerable somehow to the Plishtim, and therefore they filled them in, for whatever reason. Either they were bluffing or they were talking some sort of a truth, but they filled them in. Yitzchak didn't like that. Yitzchak couldn't take that the Plishtim had filled them in, and he redug them, and then he moved on. And then he dug another lot of wells, until he reached the third well, and that was the... So in order to keep it all short, because we're running short of time, there's a very amazing Ramban here in the whole discussion, and that leads to a very fascinating discussion, which we'll just deal with briefly. The Ramban says that in Emerson, the Plishtim were very bad, and they were very evil people, and it was good that Yitzchak got out of their way. And therefore, when they told Yitzchak to move out, he left them alone, and those beiros which they'd filled up, and he went out. And the Ramban tends to indicate that on his way out, Avram Avinu had been very active with digging wells. And Avram Avinu dug all sorts of wells, both inside Gror and outside Gror. Avraham Avinu had been moving around digging wells, and as Yitzchak went out on his way, then he dug wells which Avraham Avinu had dug, but not the ones that the Plishtim would be inside their kingdom. These were other wells on his way through. Or, some people understand that maybe what he means that he dug other wells altogether when he got over to Nachal Gra. And what are those? Those are the 3 wells that we have here. These 3 new wells. Upon him, it's outside the original ones that have been filled up inside the Malchus of Gra. And it would appear in the Ramban that it actually means that he dug these 3 new ones. And the ones that have been filled up by the Plishtim, he left them alone. So, comes along the Ramban, he said, what are these three new wells? And he says that the Inen of Aper, Mayim Chayim, is indicatory of the Beis HaMikdash. Even though the Ramban B'derech Ha'ol learns only B'derech HaPshat. And he says that it's indicatory, Be'er Mayim Chayim is Beis Elokeinu. The Hedikat 770. Well, I would have thought somebody would have put up his hand and said, yes, Yechia Melech or something. You guys are all for Shlovim. 770 is Be'er Mayim Chayim. Anyway, the Beis HaMikdash.
They have one. They have a well over there.
They do, he's right. And the Rebbe used to go and draw what do you call it? Used to make tashlit there. Yeah, I think he used to also draw Maim Shalono. Yeah. I once tried to go tashlit when the Rebbe went out to that Ba'ir. I gave it up. It was impossible. Physical impossibility. Man. You could not get anywhere near half a kilometre or more. Just massive piles of bodies, one on top of the other. It was right just outside the door, certainly into the garden. When the Rebbe used to go all the way down to Prospect Park, then I went with him. I went with him twice. When he young, they used to march at the head of this whole big army of sitting all the way down, all the way down Eastern Parkway. So I had to come out from the old timers, but I saw the old story when the Rebbe used to take everybody along, and he used to walk along and inspect all of Siddim like a parade. You know, you have all these guys standing on on the Eastern Parkway outside someone. So the Rebbe used to walk through them all and look everybody up and down. He would go up to the head, and then he would start walking the whole. And the Rebbe jumped over the gate one year, you know. Yeah, I was there, but I didn't see it. So it was the Rebbe did it so quick that only those who were in the first battalion, they actually saw him do it. But the others who came up later, they didn't see it. They were too busy trying to creep over the gate themselves.
So all those people just jumped over.
But the Rebbe just crept up the gate. He jumped over like a young athlete.
You also climbed over?
Huh?
You all climbed over?
Yeah, but I had to have somebody help me. I didn't get I got my, what do you call it? I used to have those things, what do you call them? A manjet, they call it in India. A calf. I got my calf caught in one of the spikes. All right. So, comes along the Ramban, and the Ramban, he says that the Beis HaMikdash is called Be'er Mayim and Be'er Mayim Chayim. And then he says that the first Beis HaMikdash is called Asik. So he said, we see that the Yidden, after they had the first Beis HaMikdash, then Malchus Shlomo, the kingdom of King Shlomo, didn't last all that long, and already in the time of his son, they split the kingdom into two. And it's brought down up in Kabbalah, and the Mezrich Maggid brings it. The majority of the Tzoros of the Golos, Rachmanin and Klan, and the majority of all the problems that have hit Yidden during the generations since then, due to the fact that they split the Malchus into two. A very, very terrible thing. And what happened was that between the two kingdoms there was always trouble. And in the end, the kingdoms in Malchus Yisrael, which was in the Shomron, well, they in the end stopped people going to the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, the whole Arichas HaInyan. And that was a union of quarrels and asik between Yidden. And then the Ramban says that later the Goyim also started, Sancheir came and he made a whole war, and then it didn't work. But then later he came again, where he sent generals, and Nebuchadnezzar, what the ganze do is, the last few hundred years of the first Beis HaMikdash was wars all the time trying to fight out the Bavliim, the ganze. They took over eventually, and the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And the second Beis HaMikdash was called Sitno, hate, actually. So it's brought down that in the time of Achashverosh, in the time of Haman, then Achashverosh and the king before him, Darius, they'd already decided to let the Eden go back and build the second Beis HaMikdash. But when Achashverosh took over, and particularly he came under the influence of Haman, then they sent a letter to stop the whole thing, and it's written that they wrote a letter of hatred to all the people in Yerushalayim, that they must not cooperate with the people who are trying to build the Beis HaMikdash. Has to become completely bottled, Rahman in Islam, and anybody who will hate, literally, those who work on the Beis HaMikdash, he's a kosher mensch, Rahman in Islam. In other words, that they stirred up hatred amongst the Yidden, trying to, for the sake of saving their skins from the threat of the Melech Bavel, that they should be mevatel the building of Beis HaMikdash. And as it went on, it took Ezra and the others, when they came back eventually, years later, it took them a tremendous amount of work to get people to be enthused and to be cooperative in building the second Beis HaMikdash. Yadua Mafurza. So that's the second one, Sitno. And the third one is the third Beis HaMikdash, and the Ramban says that it's going to be built, and it's going to be Hirchiv Hashem. No, it's going to be built Menashamayim, and the Eibush will broaden everything in the whole world, and Yidden will be Farinober. Oh, it's one day. Hello? I'm sorry, you have to pull that thing off your head, and you right down off your head. And you got to sit and look and listen in a proper way. Because what you're really doing is chapping a shlof, and you think, I can't see you. You got your head covered by that crazy business. And of her, says the Ramban, the third one is Uforino Ba'oretz, and it's going to be this tremendous spread out in the Jewish people. In other words, they're all going to come back to Eretz Yisrael, and Yemot L'Tayin Uforino Ba'oretz. In other words, the third of these is they didn't quarrel about it anymore. That's all the Goyim are going to be batel, and they are also going to serve the Eibishter. And the Ramban finishes off his statement, his argument, that that's the three wells that they dug after they became potter from the Plishtim. After he'd left Eretz Plishtim, he'd gone to Nachal Gro. Yeah, even though the Roye Gro made trouble with the first two, over the third one is the Harchova Amitius V'atzmius, third Beis HaMikdash. Comes again the Rabbeinu B'chaye, and the Rabbeinu B'chaye says another in which he notes a slightly different shot. It's got a certain link, as we'll soon see in a second. The Rabbeinu B'chaye says that Avram Avinu made a lot of people. I don't know, there seems to be some problem with you. Either you like to joke with yourself or you like to joke with other people. I don't know what's your problem.
It was a sneeze, and
Huh?
I sneezed, and somebody was telling me that I shouldn't try to hold it in.
Oh, you smile from pleasure in the learning. Oh, that's very good. The infantino. So after Rabbeinu B'chai, Avram Avinu had an effect on thousands of people. As they said the Rambam brings in Hilchos Tainis, he brings that Avram Avinu spoke with tens of thousands of people. Tens of thousands of people. It's a lot of people in those days. We didn't have all the emails and all the the faxes and all the mices, the computers, and the guns to do it. There's a lot of people. So Avram Avinu had a whole lot of people who were called Gerim, a lot of people that he brought under Kanfei Shechina, and he made them into people. There's a whole big deal on whether they were Mamish Gerim al Pi Halacha or whether they weren't. And if I said to Rabbeinu Bechaye that the word Be'er is the same gematria as the word Ger. Try it out and you'll see it's very simple. And I mean, what happened was that Avraham Avinu, so Avraham Avinu worked on people to change their lives. That was the whole thing of Avraham Avinu. In other words, he started the whole concept that you got to persuade people that you didn't come down into the world just to schlep around and just fill all your tithes and do whatever, but you came down to be different and to be kaseda in a matter where you would alter and change your life. And therefore, the people, the people that they become strange, like what they were, and that's an amazing concept. Erefa, the Rebbeinu B'chai, an amazing pshat, that he says, however, Avraham Avinu made these be'eres, which are people, and they got involved with the Plishtim after he passed away. And what did the Plishtim do? The Plishtim filled up their well and their living, what you might call it, the foul inside them. And the Plishtim filled it all up and blocked it all up. And so these people began to, have kashas on Avraham Avinu, and they began to drop away. And they were no longer bearers the way that was really meant to be. Came along Yitzchak and he said, oh no. And Yitzchak Avinu, he frished them, as they say in Yiddish, he frished them up. In other words, he brought them to a new freshness and a new appreciation in such a way that he redug the wells, even if the Plishtim had completely filled them up. In other words, that if they'd become completely indifferent and fadreit from the Plishtim, Yitzchak Avinu refreshed them. And then he went even further and he made new be'eres. Now that's a chiddush dova, because we don't really notice in the psukim that Yitzchak Avinu worked doing it for us like we do with Avraham Avinu. We sit the whole time with Avraham Avinu, even in the psukim. And if he's that Yitzchak was also busy when the digging at the Be'eros was a Gashmis Dikazak, which its Ika Inyan was to be mashpia of other people, and other mention, and to bring them also to be Be'eros, which means that if he said it could be that you do a certain Inyan in Gashmias, but the whole you have to do it in such a way that it becomes a levadika source of water and a dogma higher to other people. And Derech Agav, that's the whole Inyan from Tomchei Shmima, that's the whole Inyan from Neir Islahoyer, that even though you live in the way like other people do, or you're a dogma, you shine off. Or to use the famous expression of the Rebbe Rashab, you're a lanterne, you light up, you light up the lights in the street. Lamplighter, very nice, lamplighter. And made a little feast there. Yitzchak was Isaac, neged the Plishtim, and then Ein Chanami, once he got past all these mice of the Plishtim and he renewed all those Gerim, he went out and made a whole new set. To the point that he made them into Mishchiftim. And he said it's not enough just one and two, but it's got to be three. We've got to be holding by the Inyan from Mashiach. We've got to make the world a different place. Forinu ba'oret beis hamikdash hashlishi. In other words, from them come to Islachayra, that it's not enough just to make people into interested people. And not enough just to bring them to spiritual, elevation. You've got to teach them what is the ultimate point that's revealed by the Nasi and the Melech HaMashiach of that generation. And the Rebbe said in one of the Sichas in Toshin Nun Beis, the Rebbe said that one of the first things you have to say to a Yid when you meet him, even if you didn't know him before, you have to say that we want Mashiach now. And you got to talk to him about Mashiach. He'll pick up his umbrella and give you a zetz in Kop. And Chas v'sholom, he won't do that. That's nicht done. No, on the contrary, he'll be very thrilled, and he'll go away and he'll think about it carefully, and he'll tell his family that Mashiach is coming. That's what the Rebbe said. And the Rebbe told the Shluchim, by the Chinuch Shluchim, that the whole Shlichus nowadays is only Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. And Lamar B'Sapele, the tremendous wonder is that the Shluchim, at the Chinuch Shluchim, don't learn that Tzich. About upon him, Mitadei Zatam, Ayadua, or Abilti Yadua, that's unfortunately the matzav. However, that's what the Rebbe told the Shluchim. And if I come to Israel, the Rabbeinu B'chai, a whole new wondrous idea that digging Be'eres was a inner of making new people. They fall into the hands of the Plishtim, and they get stopped up again. They get blocked. Over Yitzchak Avinu's got the power to remake them. So I thought to Shaila, what are those in Yonim, and what are they briefly in Avodas Hashem, V'chulu, and what do they got to do with us? Well, like we saw, there's a difference in considered between a Mayon and a Be'er. We just told you that the Be'er is Mayim Chaim. Be'er Mayim Chaim. So now a Mayon is also Mayim Chaim. A Mayon is also Mayim Chaim. What's the difference between a Mayon and a Be'er? Very nice. A Mayon is B'yedei Shamayim. That's very important. Consider that a Mayon is made by the Eibishter. In other words, it's something that was there from way back. We don't know how it happened. It's just there. It's just keep pouring water in from the Terrain. A Be'er is something that people dig. Or they dig in such a way that they eventually reach Mayim Chaim, and then that Mayim Chaim comes up with a remarkable power from the bottom of the earth, or from wherever they hit the water, and it becomes Mayim Chaim. So the shaila is, how come it's Mayim Chaim? So it's brought in Siddur that because it had to work itself, and the emphasis is that the Alter Rebbe brings down in Torah. It's a very amazing thing. And it's also brought in a Maimon for the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah in Parsha Chukas. The Alter Rebbe brings a whole hezber based on the Medrash that really all the water in the wells that comes up out of the ground really comes from the four rivers which are mentioned in Bereshis. You know, in the Bereshis, the four rivers, and the fourth one is called Pras. Nahar Pras, what they call it Euphrates, I think it's called. And the Gemara says that Nahar Pras is a very amazing Nahar. It's like the general Nahar from which all the other waters in the earth are sort of mekabel. It's all amazing business. But, says the Alter Rebbe, that's what the waters in the earth are mekabel m'mayla lamata. But a Be'er is where you take the water that came down from those divine sources, and it got held up under the earth, and it became, as it were, blocked. It couldn't get its way through. So what did it do? It started fighting in order to get up, and by fighting through all the layers of the earth, it becomes purified into Mayim Chaim. And when you get to it by digging, you will free it, and it's able to come out with a burst and express itself in the form of Mayim Chaim. So here we see then that a Be'er has got all the Maila of a Mayon, but it's different. It comes through the Avodas Ha'odam Milmatala Maila Davke. And a Davke produces Mayim Chaim B'derech Koyecha Ha'odam Davke. Davke Milmatala Me'ashenkin. A Mayon is Milmaila Lamata. Therefore, Siddur explains the Neshama how it is Lamaila in Gan Eden before it comes down as a Mayon. But when it comes down into the earth, and it comes down into the goof, and it's got to work its way up through the goof and become Ainif and Nefesh Elokis that is one over the Nefesh Abamis and one over the goof, or then it becomes a Be'er Mayim Chaim, and that's the highest Madrege. That's incomparably higher than it was in the Gan Eden, in the Mayon, how it was Lamaila. Arafah, the Inim from Be'er is indicatory of how the Mensch literally conquers the earth, and he turns it into a purifying thing that brings out Mayim Chaim, and it brings out a Gilui in Ruchniyas and a Gilui in Neshamas incomparably greater than any other Inyan and any other level in Gilui HaRuchniyas. Afila is Koidem Yiridose Lamata, even now it is in Gan Eden. And that's what we see, that Daka, when the Neshama comes Lamata, then the Eibishter gives it a commandment, B'chol Levovcho, B'chol Nafshecho, but then he says, B'chol Miyoi Decho. That in Gan Eden, it's also B'chol Levovcho, B'chol Nafshecho. B'chol Miyoi Decho, without rule, without any holes, without limitation, cloud. Well, that's only down here in this world, and that's the union from Be'er Mayim Chaim. And I mean, that's the union that Avraham Avinu brought into the world. And that was a great shinui that Avraham Avinu, the change that he brought into human life, that you've got to become a living ba'er. You can't just rely on ruchnias, the way it's given to you or the way you hear it from others. You've got to take it and be a better person with it. And that was the Taich Gerim. And therefore the gematria ba'er. That's the union of a man that's prepared to join up with Avraham Avinu and become either a din of a yid, or at least a forerunner, those who were later to be mamish, the Jewish people, kipshutay. And if Yitzchak Avinu keeps a careful watch on these people, and he sees that it's very easy for the Plishtim to fill up the wells. Yeah, it's very easy for the Plishtim to put these people in a hell of a Esther. So it's brought down and considers what is the Plishtim, what are they? And it's written that the word Plishtim is from the word in the Gemara, Movi Mefulash, an open lane, a lane that's open from both ends. In other words, how do you call it? A Plishti in Ruchnias is where you're too open. You're open from both ends, and you let everything in, and you don't criticize very much what is coming in, what is being dealt with you, and what's sort of having an effect on you. You just sort of, you're also good. That's got a hechsher, gamto. People say this is okay, gamto. Zionism and all the Medina, the whole Shmansism, the whole Maasism, the whole Hellenbest, gamto. Liumiyut, gamto. Hako. And remember, what happens to the Nefesh Elokis, and what happens to the divine soul in that type of situation? It gradually cools down. And then the Alter Rebbe says in another place that Plishtoi is litzonas, how do you call it? Joking around and goofing around for no purpose. So the person says, what could that possibly do any harm? I'm just making a bit of a joke, I'm just making a bit crazy, I'm just, making a bit mashuga. What can that be? So the Alter Rebbe says you must be very careful because it catches on. It becomes a habit, and you can't tear yourself away from the Litzona. And he said that Litzonas can Rachmanin and Tlan, it can cover over your whole wealth. And instead of being a levitic, a spiritual well, what do you get? Tim Tum Halei Rachmanin. That's what Rashi says, Veloshna Talmud. In other words, in the latter generations, when Yidden were already in the goals and the Talmud, then they realized that was Mitam Taim Esalei, that it blocks off your heart. And you do everything, and everything seems to be alright. You seem to be putting on tefillin and doing what you're supposed to do. But when your heart is blocked, it's all just a lot of... So when you come into a shir, you sit back and say, oh, shir, you have to put up with it, It's just he's carrying on again, and so on and so forth. And I say, oh yes, I came to the yeshiva, I've got to get a certificate, I can hang on my wall later. I can say, I got a shmicha, and I got this. If I can have plenty of timtum alive, and I won't bother anybody. And if says Rashi, no, this is mitamteim misalev, but this is the pu'ula of the plishtim. That's exactly what they do. And if you got to have Yitzchok Avinu, according to Rashi, according to those Pirushim in Rashi, Yitzchok Avinu right under the noses of the Plishtim. He dug again those wells that they were there. They didn't fill them up again for some reason. Because Yitzchok is the Gevura, is the Kedusha. Yitzchok is how they call it, Chayes with a brain. They call it, Avraham Avinu was very gentle, Avos Hashem, Avos Abliyah. Yitzchok is tough. But he's very, very geschmack with his toughness. Yeah? He brings in from Schoik. Schoik is laughter and tainug. Or by emes a simcha and emes a tainug, you know, of course. If you have that, then you can beat all the plishtim and you can beat everybody. Because you don't need all the latonas and you're happy, just like you are. You're happy and you're burning with simcha and with joy and the fact that you're a Yid and that you have Torah mitzvahs and that you have the Rebbe and that you have Moshiach and you have all good Sachen. You don't need all the Burikamais. I mean, the Shalom and every Yid should have the Gashmias, everything you need. No, the Zayn Taki, yeah, but take simcha, but to live up, but all in yonim. But that's the Inen of Yitzchak. Yitzchak wakes up in the people of Rome made, but they were still a little bit, and they were Sport considers that you have to have Yitzchak to mamish save you from Olam Zeh. And you shouldn't get filled up with the dough. Therefore, it's put down. The author writes it in Torah. In another place, there's a difference between ash and dust. That ash can sometimes produce things. If you put things in ash, they sometimes grow. At least I think they do. Well, at least they get better, or something happens to them. Ash, yeah. But if you put things in dust, dust is mamish good. Dust is, and not only that, dust is sort of like heavy. And I never. That's why Ephraim, in last week's parsha, he's Meloshen Awful. He's Ephraim. He's a man of dust. In other words, he's eating from heaviness, laziness. Can't be burning. Leave me alone. And let me put my feet up in my room. Leave me alone. The Seder business of mine. Ephraim. Go to South Africa, Is a man, Rafisa, he's not so happy, he don't insult South Africa. Nobody means to insult South Africa. Is a mega is that awful. It's not good, awful is sort of heavy and unproductive, absolutely. And that brings to Timtuma, Alei, Yitzchak can save you from that, because Yitzchak is bread. It's very called as sharp, with kavula, over mit, with levitik, and therefore, it's an amazing thing. As Fortan considers, what's it eating from Be'er Mayim Chaim in everyday life? Eating from Be'er Mayim Chaim in everyday life is mitzvahs, keeping mitzvahs. You have to take your body and do things and move, and you have to do mitzvahs, bein mitzvahs, bein oram mocking, and bein oram chaveroi. And what is the mayon? What's given from heaven? Oddly enough, learning Torah and davening, those are things which are given from heaven. I also got a daven, which is singing the base Knesset and everything's given. It's like a gift from heaven. When you go out into the world, that's when you face mitzvahs maisi. So the inyan from mayon, milmaila lamata, that's all the good things that you get, like davening, a nice pshat in our learning and in shiur or something like that. They give you a certificate and tell you good to sagen. Yeah, there's a coffee tonight. And then there's a anyway, you got to go out into the world and you've got to change the world. And because that's a mitzvah is giving tzedakah, helping other people, doing mitzvah, all those inyanim, waving your tzitzis under people's noses. You know the famous story with the guy that the Friedrich Rebbe sent some guys out on and they didn't meet anybody. They didn't know anybody. They didn't find any Yidden. The one fellow was a bit of a butler, and his tzitzis was hanging too far out of under his short coat. There was a big tzitzis was blowing in the wind, and there was a Yid way up on the ninth floor or something. He was looking down into the street, and he saw this tzitzis blowing. You don't know the story? You guys don't know the story? And this guy saw the tzitzis blowing in the wind. He saw the tzitzis blowing in the wind. And all of a sudden he remembered his grandfather and his father in Poland, and he just completely disintegrated. And he ran down on the street and he chased after these guys. He said, you must come up into my house. I want to talk with you. I want to tell you what you bought me. I said, what do we do for you? We don't even know what happened. He said, I saw your tzitzis blowing in the wind. What happened?
Wow, there's some noise outside.
Huh?
There's some noise outside.
Anyway, he saw the tzitzis blowing in the wind, so they took him up, and they left him with a mezuzah on his door, and with who knows what, a whole big story. I answered, might was we say. And I mean, that's the unit for mitzvahs, Maisius. Erefa, it's brought down in the Arizal, the Alter Rebbe brings it, brought down in the Kislev Arizal, that the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital asked the Arizal, how come he was zeicher to such unbelievable madrega? You know the story. And he said, we all learned Kabbalah, but we didn't make it like you did. How come you was zeicher to these unbelievable levels? And the Arizal said, only because of one thing. He said, Simcha shel mitzvah. That on every mitzvah that came my way, I was Sameach, Simcha, Gedela, Ad Ein Kates V'Shiur. No limitation to the Simcha that I had in every mitzvah. It's not enough that you have a chup, you have to play with it. And if the Alter Rebbe brings it down in the Maimah, in Torah, the Alter Rebbe brings down that the Arizal, for that reason, he was Sameach. So the Alter Rebbe says, of course, it's not the Arizal used to daven with all the tremendous Yehudim in Kabbalah. Why didn't he say that I reached because I davened with all these Yehudim in Kabbalah? Why does the Arizal say? Because of the Simcha, he had a mitzvah. Because das ist all the Metachas, das ist the Be'er Mayim Chayv. Hele dik is up. No, it's pille plot. And I made a dasi in the Beis Hamikdash. That's what Rashi means. V'nei foish ba'ara. We're going to spread around and we're going to be fruitful. We are. Yidden are going to spread. And it's going to be the Eden for Pulia in the Eden of the earth. Mamish Kipshuli, Davki in the world where the mitzvah smices. Begashmiyad. Well, that helps. It didn't spread out also. And they become many. And the fathers are absolutely unbelievable Balaturim. You guys know what the Balaturim is? You notice it there on the Chumash? He wrote that in 2 nights, the Balaturim. He wrote the whole Pirush on the Chumash in 2 nights. Listen, boy, you don't play that sort of game with me. It doesn't work. Okay? Either you stop it or you're out on your head. Shamila, Balaturim wrote it in 2 nights. That his father, the Rosh, he was the son of the Rosh. The Rosh had time to do that he spends his whole time on Torah Shabbat Pei. He doesn't learn enough Torah Shabbat. So he showed his father that he knows the Chumash. He wrote the whole Balaturim in 2 nights. And he bought him the pure. Yeah. So the Balaturim brings an amazing mass. And he said, what is the bear Ashlishi? What is the bear Ashlishi? He said, that's Chanukah. And he said that there happened the most amazing ness, that the Yavonim interfered with the they interfered with Rosh Chodesh, with Shabbos, and with Taras HaMishpacha, with the Inen of Mikveh. So he said, what is the Inen of Be'er Mayim Chayim, the Inen of Rechoy V'Sanor, the Be'er HaShlishi? That every year they wanted to keep Taras HaMishpacha in the time when the Yavonim, he had a miraculous mikveh which was created from heaven in his house. They stayed in the Balaturim. I've never seen anything like that written before. And he said that every Jewish home in Jerusalem that wanted had a miraculous mikveh in its backyard. As they stayed, you can look it up, you can see it in the Balaturim. It's just unbelievable. So I come along certain people and I said, why is that not mentioned? She mentioned the Gemara and the Medrashim. I thought, yeah, so it is written in a Medrash. Some people say it's written in some unusual Medrash that there is such a Maisa. It's there. But people say that if you try to live in a miraculous way, then it becomes a natural thing. Miracles becomes that's all part of the Teva. And that's what the Baal Shem Tov said. That once a miracle happens by Yidden, it becomes part of the Teva. It's just a normal thing. And therefore, if you live in a miraculous way, in other words, beyond your Teva, beyond your nature, beyond your limitations, then you get miracles in a natural way. And that's how these people are met with their unbelievable Balaturim. I'll go upon him. That's the Inen of the Beis Hamikdash. That the Beis Hamikdash is in the world, the Inen of Gilei Elokus Mamish in Oel Magashmi. And therefore it's brought down at the Kodesh HaKadoshim, was Gilui Atzmus Eitzev. As I state in Drush Exodus, not Ak, not Pnimitzach, not Urshel Nea Timtum, but the Eibishter Mamish Be'atzmusah. Roa ala Kaperes, I will be seen, literally, me, myself. And Mamera Nimtel, if he said that the Beis HaMikdash is the union of Atzmus Eitzev with the Etzem Earth. Therefore it's Be'er Mayim Chayim. Something that people build. It was dug out. Ili Yosid Mashiach's going to build it. But the Rebbe says, oh, not exactly. Yes and no. If we're going to have to build the Yesodis, we're going to put down, and then the rest of it will come down from heaven. But the Yesodis are going to be in also. And that's the union of Be'er Mayim Chayim. That's the union of the Be'eres of Yitzchok Davke. For Yitzchok Liosid, he's going to be the Iker. The fathers are put down the Gemara Masech to Shabbos, and therefore Yitzchok is Shmeina Pomim to Shem Havaya. But that's also a remes to Chanukah, Shmeina Piomim, the union for Neir Havaya, Nishma Sodom, that Yitzchok is Shmeina, and Shmeina is indicatory of the Yer Shalom Ayla Mishtal Shalaz. Ki Mavur, Bahava Drushei Chasidus. So there you got it, guys, that you got to go around digging wells. You got to make people different. And you got to dig wells inside Yidden, and you got to make them realize that the third Beis HaMikdash is absolutely essential. The whole regular, it doesn't happen. It's a tremendous loss to the Jewish people, to the whole world. Kipshutai is how we have to go around shraying. We want the Beis HaMikdash now, we want Mashiach now. And we have to do it in our even from Yitzchak, Brenadike, Budistike, Chayes. And Besimcha, Betul Levov, and Teich Miyad Mamish will be together with the Rebbe in the Beis HaMikdash, Rechoives, Uforino, Orez.